I went on a weekend camping trip with a few coworkers last fall. There were 5 of us in total. We'd been talking about it for a while, and finally, someone picked a weekend, found a remote spot upstate, and made it happen. We drove up Friday afternoon and reached the campsite just before sundown. It was far from any towns, and there was no cell service. The spot was tucked between a lake and a dense tree line that stretched for miles in all directions. It was peaceful, quiet, and felt like the perfect break from work. We set up our tents in a wide semicircle around a central fire pit. One guy handled the firewood, another started dinner on a portable grill, and the rest of us set up chairs and unpacked our gear. The first night went smoothly, just music from a Bluetooth speaker, some beers, burgers, and casual talk around the fire until past midnight. Eventually, everyone drifted off into their tents. I stayed up a little longer, sitting in one of the folding chairs with a blanket over my shoulders, just staring into the fire and listening to the sounds of the woods. There wasn't much sound, just the occasional crack of branches in the distance or leaves rustling in the wind. The fire popped and shifted every now and then. I was relaxed, not even tired yet. The woods had that kind of stillness that makes everything feel slower. You notice the tiniest things, like how the firelight flickers on the trees or how your breath fogs up in the cold night air. That was when I saw the first pair of eyes. They were maybe 30 feet away, just beyond where the light of the fire started to fade into black. The shine caught my attention immediately. At first, I assumed it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. The eyes weren't moving, just staring. I didn't think much of it. Animals freeze when they sense humans nearby. But then a second pair of eyes appeared, just to the left of the first, then a third, then a fourth. They weren't shifting or blinking, just still, spaced out evenly, all at the same height. I knew something was wrong. Animals don't line up like that. They don't just stand still and stare, perfectly motionless, like statues. Felt calculated, not like wild animals. It looked like people standing in the dark, watching me. I kept my eyes on them. I didn't move. I didn't even want to breathe too loudly. I just sat there, frozen in the chair, staring back, trying to make out details beyond the eyes. But it was pitch black behind them. I could barely see the shapes, but the height seemed all wrong for animals. The spacing too perfect, too human. I leaned back just enough to whisper to someone in the closest tent. I whispered their name again and again, until I heard the sound of the tent zipper slowly opening. By the time they poked their head out to look, the eyes were gone. Completely, like they'd never been there. I didn't sleep that night. I went into my tent eventually, zipped it tight, and just lay there listening. Every crack outside made me flinch. I kept imagining footsteps in the leaves or the sound of someone brushing past the nylon walls. But there was nothing, just silence. Somehow that was worse. Morning came, and the others got up like it was any other day. We started breakfast, made coffee on the camp stove, and joked around like usual. I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't sure what I saw. Maybe it really had been animals and I was tired, overthinking. But it stuck with me, that image of 4 still sets of eyes just watching, waiting. It wasn't until we started packing up some of our gear that someone noticed the boot prints. They were in the soft dirt between our tents and the tree line. Not just a few, dozens of them. Deep, clear prints. You could make out the tread patterns, some fresh, some a little older, but all leading in the same direction. They came from the woods and stopped at random points around our campsite. Some went right up to the tents. One set stopped only a foot or 2 from where I'd been sitting by the fire. There were no prints leading back into the woods. We followed them for a while, trying to see how deep into the forest they went. The trail of prints got more spread out as they entered the tree line, almost like the people had fanned out and circled us. But after about 20 feet into the woods, they just stopped. No signs of anyone leaving. No drag marks, no broken branches, no signs of a struggle, no tire marks, nothing. It was like someone or a group of people had walked out of the woods, stood around our camp, and then vanished. We didn't talk much after that. Everyone saw the prints. We all knew they weren't ours. We checked our boots, our shoes, everything. None of the tread patterns matched. The sizes were different too. Some of the prints looked like they came from heavy work boots. Others were narrower, like running shoes. One pair was small, maybe a kid or a short woman. But the spacing and arrangement of the prints were what got to me the most. Whoever made them didn't wander around randomly. They came in from the woods, stopped, and stood in place, like they were watching. The mood shifted completely after that. We skipped lunch, packed up the rest of our stuff, and got out of there by noon. The drive back was quiet. Everyone seemed lost in their own head. No one made any jokes. No one played music. We just drove, glancing into the trees every so often, probably all wondering the same thing. We never figured out who it was. No one went to the police. We didn't take any pictures of the boot prints or file any reports. We just left. Maybe we were too embarrassed. Maybe we thought it wouldn't matter. What would we say anyway? A bunch of strangers stood in the woods and watched us, and we didn't hear or see them leave. There's no crime in that. Nothing provable. But something about it still haunts me. The way they stood so still. The way the prints came in and didn't go back out. Whoever they were, they knew what they were doing. They were quiet, organized, patient, and they were close. Close enough to hear us. Close enough to touch our tents. Close enough to watch me without blinking. I don't go camping anymore. Not out in the deep woods like that. Not without cell service. I still think about those eyes and those prints and how none of us knew they were there until the morning showed us just how close they'd gotten. We got to the campsite around late afternoon, maybe 4 or 5. It was a quiet little place tucked back in the woods, about a 1.5 mile hike from where we parked the car. I had found the spot a couple months before on a solo trip. Flat, shaded, soft ground, and about 20 feet from a small stream that ran steady and clear. You could hear it from anywhere in the site, that soft flowing sound. It was peaceful. My girlfriend had never been camping before, not properly, and I thought it'd be a good introduction. Not too deep in the woods, but remote enough that we wouldn't run into anyone else. We set up the tent together and laid out our gear. Nothing fancy, just the basics. A small 2-person tent, sleeping bags, a cooler with some food, a little portable stove. I gathered firewood while she walked down to the stream, just watching the water and skipping a few rocks. The sun was still up, casting that warm golden light through the pines. It was one of those moments you wish you could hold on to. Calm, slow, real. We had dinner around a small fire. Just some hot dogs and instant noodles, nothing fancy, but it tasted better out there. Everything does. We talked, laughed, listened to music off my phone for a bit until it got dark. No cell service, of course, but I downloaded a few playlists before we came. After a while, the fire died down and we crawled into the tent. We lay close, listening to the sounds of the woods, the chirping bugs, the faint splash of water, the wind in the trees. That part of the forest always felt alive, but not in a scary way. Just awake. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I woke up. I didn't check the time, but it had to be around 2 or 3. It was dark inside the tent, darker than usual. No moonlight. I lay there for a second, not moving, just listening. Something had changed. The sounds weren't gone, but they were different. The insects were still going, but the rhythm was off. The stream was louder now, or maybe it only felt that way because the forest had quieted down. There was a kind of tension in the air. Then I heard the noise. Movement across the stream. Slow, careful footsteps on the dry leaves. Not stomping around, not clumsy. Deliberate. I lay still, holding my breath. My girlfriend stirred next to me and opened her eyes. She whispered, asking if I heard that. I nodded. She said maybe it was a deer, but we both knew it didn't sound like one. I've heard deer plenty of times out there. They're fast, unpredictable. This was someone walking. I sat up and grabbed the flashlight, but didn't turn it on. I didn't want to draw attention. The tent was zipped up, but I could hear the steps clearly now, moving just across the water. Crunch, pause, crunch. A few seconds in between, like someone was stopping to listen. I felt her hand grip my arm tight. We sat there, silent, frozen. Then it happened. I heard my own voice. It wasn't loud, not a shout. Just a calm, quiet call. My voice saying her name. Exactly how I say it, same tone, same rhythm. From across the stream in the trees. She looked at me like her blood had turned to ice. I could feel mine do the same. I didn't move. She didn't move. I whispered, barely audible, "I didn't say that." She clutched my arm and whispered back, "Don't answer." The voice came again. Still calm, still mine, calling her name again. Over and over. Each time a little different. Sometimes a little off, like someone trying to mimic my voice but not quite getting it right. Too slow or the syllables wrong. But it was close enough that, if you weren't sure, you'd believe it. I wanted to unzip the tent, to shine the flashlight out there and yell, to do something, but I couldn't. I just couldn't. My brain kept trying to come up with a logical explanation. Some messed up prank, maybe a hunter who'd heard us earlier and was screwing around, but I couldn't make any of it make sense. Who would go through that much trouble? Why? The voice kept going. Same words, just her name, over and over, always from the same direction across the stream. It never moved, never came closer, just stood there repeating it. We sat there like that until sunrise. I didn't sleep. I don't think she did either. We just sat, backs against each other, barely breathing. I had a small pocket knife in my hand the whole time. Completely useless, but it was the only thing I had. When the first light finally started to show through the trees, the voice stopped. Just like that, gone. The normal forest sounds slowly came back. Birds, insects, the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Felt like the woods had taken a breath again. We waited another hour before unzipping the tent. I stepped out first, scanning the trees across the stream. Nothing. No sign of anyone. Just the trees and the soft water and the early morning light. Everything looked normal, but I knew it wasn't. We packed up quick. Didn't even make breakfast. I didn't want to be out there any longer than I had to. She didn't say much, just kept looking around, flinching at every little sound. I kept scanning the woods, half expecting to see someone standing just beyond the trees. Before we left, I walked across the stream. It was narrow, just a few rocks to hop over. I wanted to check, to prove something to myself, maybe. I moved slow, watching every step, my ears on high alert. When I got to the spot where I thought the voice had come from, I saw it right away. There were fresh cigarette butts on the ground, at least 4 or 5 still dry. Next to them were some energy bar wrappers, crumpled, maybe stuffed in a pocket and dropped. And footprints, not boot tracks, worn sneakers, maybe. The leaves had been flattened in a small area, like someone had stood there a long time, shifting weight from foot to foot. There was nothing supernatural about any of it. That's what made it worse. Someone had been out there watching us, listening, practicing my voice. They waited until we were asleep and then started repeating her name, just to see what would happen. They didn't try to rob us, didn't come into the tent. They just stood there all night doing that. That's what stuck with me the most. Not the voice, not the fear, just the fact that whoever it was didn't want anything. They weren't after money or gear or anything like that. They just wanted to scare us. And they did. They did it perfectly. We hiked back to the car without saying much, just kept moving. When we got to the trailhead, we finally talked a little. Tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a ranger messing around or a weird hunter. But we both knew those were just stories we told ourselves so we could sleep again. I don't go back to that campsite anymore. I still camp sometimes, but never that deep, never that far from people. And I never camp without something more than a pocket knife. I learned that night that the scariest thing in the woods isn't a bear or a storm. It's another person, one who knows you're out there, one who's willing to wait all night in the dark, just to see what your fear sounds like. I went on a solo camping trip in the Great Smoky Mountains last fall. I had a few days off work and needed to get out of the city. I'd done solo trips before, nothing major, just weekend getaways to clear my head. I usually stayed on or near marked trails, but this time I decided to go a bit deeper. Not too far off, just enough to feel more isolated. I wanted quiet, no people, Just trees, fresh air, and time to think. I packed my usual gear: tent, pad, sleeping bag, headlamp, camp stove, bear spray, and a few other basics. I always bring a physical map too, in case my GPS dies. I hiked about 5 miles from the nearest parking lot. It was late afternoon when I found a flat patch of ground beneath some tall pine trees. The area looked untouched. Soft pine needles covered the ground, and there weren't many rocks or roots. It was perfect. The forest around me was quiet, just the occasional bird and wind brushing through the trees. I set up my tent, unrolled my pad and sleeping bag, then got a small fire going with some dry wood I gathered nearby. I ate a basic dinner, ramen and jerky, and watched the sky fade from blue to black through the trees. No sounds of cars, no other campers, just the crackle of the fire and a distant owl somewhere out in the dark. When I finally crawled into my tent, it didn't take me long to fall asleep. I was tired from the hike and full enough. The air was cool but not too cold, and the smell of pine and dirt was calming. I remember shifting a few times on the pad during the night, but I didn't wake up until sometime later when something strange pulled me out of sleep. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't an animal. It was a feeling: cold. Specifically, cold air blowing across my lower back and legs through the sleeping bag. I thought maybe the tent flap had come loose or that a breeze had picked up. I sat up and looked around. The tent was still zipped up tight. No wind outside, no rain, but the air inside felt weird, like a faint draft coming up from below me. I ran my hand under the sleeping pad. It felt cooler in one spot, near the center. I pressed down and felt a strange softness beneath it, like the ground wasn't packed as tightly. I moved the pad aside and cleared away some of the pine needles. That's when I noticed them: thin, narrow holes in the dirt, maybe 2 or 3 inches wide and spaced irregularly. Not natural. They weren't animal burrows either. They were straight and went down into the earth. I put my hand over one and felt cold air rising through it, steady and real. Curious but uneasy, I grabbed my small camp trowel and started to dig around the largest hole. I only had to dig down a few inches before the sound changed. The trowel made a dull clunk instead of a scrape. I froze and tapped again, same sound. Hollow. I moved more dirt and uncovered what looked like old wood, rough and cracked. I brushed more dirt away and saw the edge of a plank. It looked handmade, cut unevenly and weathered, like it had been there for a long time. Then I noticed the nails. Rusty, long nails driven through the wood and sticking upward like spikes. There were several, and they weren't random. They were spaced carefully and intentionally. That's when I realized I was lying directly on top of something. A pit trap. A handmade one, like the kind you see in survival shows or old war documentaries. A hole in the ground, covered by wood and dirt, hidden with pine needles. If I'd stepped on it, maybe it would have collapsed. Maybe the wood was thick enough to hold me while I slept, or maybe I just got lucky and set my tent over one of the support beams. I didn't wait to figure out how deep it went or how big it was. I just kept staring at those nails, thinking about what would have happened if I'd shifted my weight a little differently when I first laid down. My heart was pounding, and my mouth went dry. My brain started racing through every possibility. Who had made it? Why here? Was it meant for animals? People? I looked around, half expecting someone to be watching me from the trees, but the woods were still quiet. Not peaceful, though. That calm feeling from earlier was completely gone. My instincts told me to leave right now, no matter the time. I quickly packed up my gear, not even bothering to roll things neatly. I shoved everything into my pack, yanked out the tent stakes, and stuffed the collapsed tent inside. I turned on my headlamp and started hiking back toward the trail I came from. Every shadow looked like something. Every twig snap under my boots felt too loud. I didn't stop to rest, didn't drink water, just kept moving. I had marked a few trees on the way in with bright tape, and I used those to guide me out. Still, the woods felt different now. Heavier, somehow. I don't know if I was imagining it or if it was real, but I felt like I was being followed. I never saw or heard anyone, but I didn't shake that feeling until I was back near the parking lot. And even then, I kept checking behind me. I reached my car just after sunrise. My hands were shaking when I turned the key. I didn't eat or sleep until I got home hours later. When I finally calmed down enough to think clearly, I started trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a hunting trap. Maybe someone was trying to catch wild pigs or predators. But who sets up something like that so close to a hiking area? And why cover it so well that even a person could fall through? The thing is, it wasn't just the trap itself that scared me. It was the effort someone put into hiding it. The nails, the wood, the careful layer of dirt and pine needles, it wasn't rushed. Someone made that with intention. I don't know if it was meant for an animal or a person. I don't know how old it was or if the builder ever came back to check it. But I do know this. I could have died out there without a sound. No one knew where exactly I was. If that trap had collapsed under me, I would have bled out in the dark, alone in the middle of the woods, and maybe no one would have found me for days, or at all. Since then, I haven't gone on another solo trip. I still hike, still go on weekend camping trips, but always with someone else. And I always double-check the ground where I set up my tent. I never really thought about the idea that someone could be out there doing something like that. Not some storybook monster or ghost, just a real person with tools and time and bad intentions. That's what stuck with me the most. That's what still keeps me up sometimes. Because that trap didn't build itself. Someone made it. Someone chose that spot. And someone might still be out there. We weren't supposed to be camping there. It was one of those thick patches of woods in backwoods Alabama, somewhere off a dirt service road with no name, no signs, nothing but pine and red clay. We'd been looking for a place remote. No other campers, no cell service, no responsibilities for a couple nights. Just us and the woods. There were 4 of us, me, my friend Sarah, her boyfriend Cody, and my buddy James. We were all in our 20s and stupidly confident that we knew what we were doing. We drove up a loose gravel path that split off the main road, took it a couple miles until it faded into overgrowth, then hiked the rest of the way in. We found a good spot about half a mile from the car. It was flat, close to a small stream, and mostly hidden by tall brush and trees. The forest was quiet, too quiet almost. I remember thinking how weird it was that I didn't hear birds, but I shrugged it off. It was already late afternoon and we had to set up. We pitched 2 tents, Sarah and Cody in one, James and I in the other, and started a fire before it got dark. We cooked up some hot dogs, passed around a couple of beers, and just talked. I remember Cody brought a little Bluetooth speaker and played low music, but not loud enough to echo. We didn't want to draw too much attention. We knew we weren't supposed to be there, technically, and if a ranger did find us, we'd probably get fined or worse. That was the biggest threat we imagined at the time. After a while, the fire burned down to glowing coals. It had to be close to midnight. James and I were sitting on a log, half drunk, staring at the flames. Sarah and Cody had already gone into their tent. The air had turned cold and heavy. You could hear every little crack or step in the woods. And then we heard it, whistling. Not a bird, not some random wind sound. Someone, out there in the woods, was whistling a slow, steady tune. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. Maybe 50 yards away, somewhere behind the brush across from the stream. James and I looked at each other and killed the little speaker. Then we turned off the lantern. We didn't say anything, we didn't need to. We both assumed the same thing. Ranger, or someone hiking off trail. Either way, we didn't want to get caught. The whistling stopped, and then we heard a man's voice. Deep, calm, confident. "I know you're out here, Sarah. You too, Cody." Every hair on my body stood up. My stomach felt like it dropped into my shoes. No one knew we were here. None of us had posted anything online. Sarah and Cody had turned off their phones before we even left the car. We hadn't told anyone where we were camping. Not our parents. Not co-workers. No one. This was supposed to be a quiet, disconnected trip. The voice was close enough that we could hear him clearly, but we couldn't see him. He was just on the other side of the brush, maybe 20 or 30 feet away, hidden behind a thick wall of pine branches and undergrowth. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't calling out for someone lost. He was just speaking like he already knew where we were and what we were doing. I could feel James frozen next to me. I was the same. We didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the man started laughing to himself, low and breathy, not loud or exaggerated. It was almost like he was amused by a private joke. Then his footsteps crunched slowly along the edge of the brush. We couldn't see him, but we could track the sound of him walking. He stayed just beyond the tree line, just far enough to keep hidden, like he knew where the edge of our sight was and stayed right outside of it. He walked past the campsite, still chuckling. Then nothing, no sound, no footsteps going away, no more talking, just silence, heavy silence, like the woods were holding their breath. We didn't move. We didn't even dare whisper. Eventually, we crept into the tent. I don't remember how we got there exactly, just that my legs were stiff and my heart was pounding in my ears. We didn't wake Sarah and Cody. We didn't want to say their names. We just lay there listening. The night dragged. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jolt awake thinking I heard something. A twig snap, leaves rustling, breathing, but nothing ever came close again. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching, waiting. When the sun finally rose, the forest didn't feel any safer. It just looked less like a nightmare. We stepped out of the tent, blinking in the gray light. Sarah and Cody were up already, boiling water. They hadn't heard a thing. When we told them what happened, Sarah went pale. Cody immediately started packing up. We didn't eat. We didn't talk much. We just packed everything as fast as we could and hiked out. Every 10 or 15 feet, I'd glance behind us, half expecting to see someone trailing us through the trees. But there was no one. When we got back to the car, we tossed everything in and got the hell out of there. We didn't stop until we were on a main road with cell service. Everyone turned their phones on. No messages, no missed calls, no signs that anyone had tried to reach us. We talked about it once more on the drive home, tried to come up with some kind of explanation. Maybe someone overheard us at the gas station before we went off-grid. Maybe one of us mentioned it to someone we forgot about. But the truth is, it didn't make sense. We'd planned the trip quietly. We didn't cross paths with anyone once we turned onto that gravel road. No other cars, no people walking, just us and miles of empty woods. And even if someone had seen us, how would they know our names? None of us ever went back to that part of Alabama again. And none of us ever figured out who that man was. But what scares me the most, even now, isn't what he said. It's how casually he said it. Like he wasn't trying to scare us. Like he was just stating a fact. He knew we were there. He knew our names. And he was enjoying himself. My older brother and I went camping in Utah about a year ago. It was early fall, just cool enough in the evenings to need a hoodie, and the days were still warm and dry. We'd both been working nonstop for months, and it felt like the right time to disconnect and get out into the wilderness. We found a quiet campground tucked a couple miles down an unmarked dirt road. Just a fire ring, some flat spots for tents, and trees surrounding everything. It wasn't part of a busy park, more like a dispersed camping area people only knew about through word of mouth or maybe an old forum post. We set up camp just before sunset the first day. No cell service out there, and no other campers as far as we could see. That's what we wanted: quiet, nature, peace. We had a small fire, cooked some hot dogs, and just sat around for a while watching the flames crackle. Around 10, we turned in. I was just starting to drift off inside my tent when I heard it. A scream. Not a coyote yip or some distant animal call. It was human, sharp, panicked, real. It sounded like a woman, and it came from deep in the woods somewhere behind our site. The trees made it hard to pinpoint, but it was far off, maybe a few hundred yards out. I froze. My heart started thudding immediately. Then it came again, louder. It wasn't just one scream either. It was a series of them, as if someone was running through the woods, terrified, yelling for help, and unable to stop. I unzipped my tent, and my brother was already standing outside his, holding a flashlight. He looked as freaked out as I felt. Without speaking, we both started walking toward where we thought the sound came from. I had my phone with me, but there was no signal, and I wasn't thinking about recording anything at that point. We hiked maybe 100 yards into the trees, shining our lights in every direction, but the screams had stopped. Just silence. Not even bugs chirping anymore. That part stuck with me the most. It was like the forest had gone dead quiet right after the last scream. We stood there a while, waiting, listening, but nothing happened. No more sounds, no movement, no signs of anyone. We eventually turned back. Neither of us said much, just got back in our tents. I didn't sleep much that night, kept thinking about what I heard. It was too real to be someone messing around. The next day we kept close to the site, did some short hikes but stayed within a couple miles. We didn't want to get lost, and there was this lingering feeling of unease after what happened. Around the fire that night, we brought it up again, just mentioned how weird it had been. Neither of us had an explanation, and we didn't even joke about it. It was just hanging there between us. Then, that night, same time, same direction, it happened again. The scream, exactly like the night before. Same tone, same cadence, same number of screams, almost like it had been on repeat. But this time, I was ready. I pulled out my phone and started recording the audio. I didn't move. I didn't go into the woods again. My brother stood next to me with a flashlight, scanning the tree line, but we didn't go after it. Something about how identical it was felt wrong. Too exact, like someone had pressed play on a speaker. It stopped after about 30 seconds, just like the night before. Same way everything went completely quiet afterward. My stomach was turning. I knew then that we weren't imagining anything. We sat by the fire the rest of the night, not speaking, just listening. I didn't even bother trying to sleep. In the morning, we packed our stuff and decided to hike toward the area we thought the sound had come from. We didn't go too far the night before, but in daylight we felt safer. We walked about half a mile in, following the general direction of the sound. The trees thinned a bit and we found what looked like an old campsite. A flat patch of dirt, scorched in the center like someone had a fire going recently. Around it were some crushed beer cans, torn snack wrappers, and what made my stomach drop, a piece of duct tape stuck to a tree. It was curled up at the ends, used, and had a couple strands of long, light-colored hair stuck to the adhesive. My brother found more nearby, short strips lying on the ground. Some clean, some dirty, all used. There was no gear, no tent, no sleeping bag. Just the fire pit and the tape. Something about the whole thing felt off. Like someone had been here recently, maybe even the night before, and had packed up quickly. But why the tape? Why the fire out in the open? Why the screams? We took pictures and hiked back to the truck. Once we drove into town, I played the recording for a ranger at the nearest station. He looked concerned but didn't say much. We showed him the photos too. He said they'd look into it and asked us to email the audio. A week later, I got a call. It was the same ranger. He said they'd been comparing the recording to known cases, just in case. Then he asked if I was sitting down. I said yes. He told me that the voice on the recording, the scream, matched the voice of a missing woman who had disappeared 2 months before in that general area. She'd been camping alone. Her car was found abandoned near a remote trailhead, but there were no signs of a struggle. No body, just gone. He said the cadence, tone, even the pauses in the scream were identical to a 911 call she'd made days before vanishing. They'd been able to compare it with the original call. Same voice. The audio from my recording wasn't a live person screaming. It was a recording someone had been playing through a speaker. Someone out there had a recording of a missing woman's final moments, and they were playing it in the woods at night for whoever might be close enough to hear. The ranger didn't give many details, just said the investigation had been reopened and that my recording was now part of it. He wouldn't say if they had suspects or leads, just thanked me for turning it in. I haven't gone camping since. I haven't even been back to Utah. I keep thinking about whoever did that. Whoever was out there at night, deep in the woods, playing a woman's screams on repeat. Not just doing it once, but coming back the next night, knowing someone might still be out there. Maybe watching to see who would come. We weren't supposed to hear that. Or maybe we were. Maybe that was the point. And the worst part is knowing they're still out there. That campsite had no name. No trail led directly to it. Whoever used it knew the area, knew it well enough to come and go without leaving a trace. Sometimes I think about the scream itself, how real it was, how hopeless it sounded, and how someone decided to keep it, save it, play it again and again. For what? For fun? To scare people? Or was it a message? A warning? Either way, I'll never forget that sound, or how it felt standing in the dark woods, knowing it wasn't just an echo of the past, but something someone wanted us to hear. A few summers ago, I went camping with some friends by a lake deep in the woods. It wasn't an official campsite, just a quiet spot we'd heard about through one of the guys who had been there before. It was far from any towns or other people, the kind of place you had to hike into after parking on the side of some forest road. No cell signal, no traffic noise, no lights, just trees, water, and quiet. There were 6 of us total, 3 couples, each bringing their own tent. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, hiked in about 2 miles with our gear, and set up on a flat stretch just above the lake. The trees were tall and thick around us, but there was enough open space for our tents and a good-sized fire pit. The lake was glassy and still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. It was a peaceful spot, maybe a little too quiet for my taste, but everyone else seemed excited to be there. The first night went fine. We built a fire, cooked some food, drank a little, talked and laughed until late. The woods around us were calm. No strange noises, nothing unusual. Everyone went to bed tired but in a good mood. Saturday was a full day. We fished a bit, swam in the lake, hiked around. It was hot and sunny, and by evening we were all sunburnt and worn out. After dinner, one of the couples, Jake and Melissa, turned in early. They said they were exhausted and wanted to get some sleep. The rest of us, me, Alex, Sarah, and Jason, stayed up by the fire. We talked for a couple more hours, just enjoying the night air. The woods were quiet except for the occasional owl or distant splash from the lake. Around midnight, we decided to call it a night. I was the last one to head to my tent. As I passed by Jake and Melissa's tent, something felt off. Their tent was zipped up, but it was completely dark. That wasn't that strange by itself, but there was no sound coming from inside. No movement, no rustling, not even the sound of breathing. I paused for a second, trying to listen. Usually, you can hear something, people turning over in their sleeping bags, snoring, murmuring in their sleep. But there was absolutely nothing, just dead silence. I stood there a few seconds longer, then told myself I was overthinking it and went to bed. The night was uneventful. I woke up once or twice, probably from the cold or the hard ground, but I didn't hear anything strange. When morning came, I got up early and started boiling some water for coffee. One by one, the others woke up too. We were all moving around, stretching, eating granola bars, getting ready for the day. Except Jake and Melissa hadn't come out of their tent. At first, we thought they were just sleeping in, but after a while, it started to seem weird. The sun was already up and shining directly on their tent, making it hot inside. Their boots were still outside the door, right where they'd left them. We called out to them, but no one answered. No sounds from inside, just like the night before. We gave it another 10 minutes, then walked over together and unzipped the door flap. Their sleeping bags were inside, side by side, but both were completely empty. Not just that, they were neatly zipped down, like someone had gotten up carefully and made sure not to leave a mess. Their backpacks were still in the corner. Water bottles, clothes, flashlight, everything was in place. Even their phones were in the tent, dead of course, since there was no signal out there anyway. It didn't make sense. If they had gone out in the night, they would have put on their boots. The forest floor was rocky and uneven, and walking barefoot would have been impossible, especially in the dark. But their boots were untouched, and there was no sign of a struggle either. No torn fabric, no drag marks, nothing out of place. It looked like they had just vanished. We searched the immediate area, walked around the lake, called their names, checked the trail we came in on. Nothing. It was like they had dissolved into thin air. Eventually, we decided it was beyond what we could handle and we needed help. We packed light and hiked back to the cars. It was nearly noon by the time we reached a spot with a signal. We called 911 and explained what happened. Within a few hours, a couple sheriff's deputies and a small search and rescue crew were on their way in. We led them back to the site. They checked everything, took photos of the tent, asked us a million questions, spread out and started searching the area with dogs and volunteers. They searched for 3 days straight. They found nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no sign of them ever leaving the tent. It was like they had simply disappeared in the middle of the night without disturbing a single thing. Their families were contacted, and it became a full missing persons case. Posters went up. Local news ran the story. More search teams came out. Boats dragged the lake. Helicopters scanned the forest with infrared cameras. Still nothing. No scent trails, no torn clothing, no discarded items. Jake and Melissa were just gone. We all gave statements. I had to go over every minute of that night over and over again. What time did they go to bed? Did they say anything strange? Did they seem upset? Did we hear anything in the night? The answers were always the same. Nothing seemed wrong. They went to bed early. That's all. Eventually, the search was scaled back. Then it stopped. There was nothing left to look for. The forest was just too big, and there were no leads to follow. I don't think they ever even found a footprint. After the search was called off, we went back one last time to collect the rest of our gear. Their tent was still there. We hadn't touched it since that morning. It looked exactly the same, the flaps closed, the sleeping bags inside, boots at the front. We packed it up and carried it out, though none of us really wanted to touch it. It felt wrong somehow, like we were messing with something we shouldn't be. I still think about that trip more than I care to admit. It doesn't make sense. There's no explanation that fits. I've run through every possible theory. Sleepwalking, animal attack, foul play, even some kind of weird accident, but none of it lines up. You don't just leave a tent barefoot in the middle of the night and vanish without leaving a trace. Not both people. Not like that. Years have passed, and there's been no sign of them. No sightings, no remains, no trace of what happened. Their families are still waiting, still hoping. I don't think there's any hope left, though. Something happened out there. I don't know what, but I've never gone camping since, and I don't think I ever will. A couple of years ago, I went on a solo camping trip in a national forest in Oregon. I'd been planning it for weeks. I was working a desk job at the time, constantly surrounded by the sounds of phones ringing and keyboards clacking. I needed a break. Just me, the trees, and silence. I chose a large national forest in central Oregon, one that was well known but not overly crowded. It was early fall, so the weather was still decent during the day but got cold enough at night to keep most casual campers away. I packed light, brought basic gear, tent, sleeping bag, food for 3 days, a small hatchet, my phone, mostly for maps and emergencies, and a notebook. No firearm. In hindsight, that was probably a mistake. I parked my car at one of the official trailheads early in the morning. There were only 2 other cars in the lot. I locked up, strapped on my backpack, and started walking. The first hour or so followed the main trail. I passed a few signs, one about bears in the area and another warning people to be aware of sudden weather changes. But the sky was clear, no clouds, and I wasn't planning on staying too high up in elevation. After maybe another mile, I veered off the trail. I didn't want to be anywhere near other people. I wanted true silence. No distant campfire voices or car doors slamming. I walked for over an hour through thick forest. The trees here were older, bigger. Some sections were packed with ferns and brush, but every now and then there was a stretch of bare forest floor, covered in a soft bed of pine needles. Eventually, I came across a clearing that felt perfect. It was about the size of a tennis court, bordered on all sides by tall pines. The middle was flat, dry, and soft, and through a gap in the trees on the far side, I could see a stretch of the valley below. It was beautiful. Not a sound except for the occasional bird call. No signs of anyone having camped there. No trash, no fire ring. Untouched. I set up my tent near the edge of the clearing and used some rocks from around the area to build a small fire ring a few feet out in front. The fire was just for light and warmth. I wasn't cooking anything over it. I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring a bit around the area, just slow walking, enjoying the silence. I didn't go too far, just enough to feel like I had a lay of the land. I noticed that the forest floor was softer in some areas, and here and there were tiny trails, like maybe from deer or elk. I saw some scat that confirmed it. No bear tracks, though, which made me feel better. As the sun started to go down, I got a small fire going and sat with a bag of trail mix in my lap, scribbling some thoughts in my notebook. The quiet really does something to you. It clears your head in ways that no amount of sleep or relaxation at home can. It resets something. By the time it got dark, I had put out the fire, packed up my food in a sealed bag, and placed it several feet away from my tent. I crawled into my sleeping bag and fell asleep almost instantly. No phones, no buzzing, just the cold air and the sound of wind in the trees. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. The forest was silent, not even wind. Then I heard it again, a soft, metallic clinking. It wasn't loud, but it was rhythmic, like metal gently tapping against metal. It didn't make sense. I didn't bring anything that would make that sound. I slowly sat up in my sleeping bag and strained to listen. The noise continued for another 10 seconds, then stopped. I unzipped the tent quietly and peeked outside. The moon was out, not full but bright enough to cast faint silver light through the trees. Everything looked normal. I stayed there, half inside the tent, just listening. Nothing. After a few minutes, I laid back down and told myself it was probably some animal knocking something over, maybe moving rocks around. But just as I settled back into the sleeping bag, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The rocks from my fire ring were gone. I sat up again and looked out. The fire ring I had made earlier was empty. The rocks were no longer arranged in a circle a few feet in front of the tent. My eyes adjusted a bit more, and then I saw it. The rocks had been moved. They were now laid out in a perfect circle around the base of my tent. Someone had moved them while I was sleeping and made a new ring, not even bothering to scatter them randomly, just perfectly placed around where I slept. I didn't hear anyone. I didn't see anyone. But that kind of thing doesn't happen by itself. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat upright, clutching my small hatchet, staring at the tent flap. Every so often I'd hear a small crack from the woods, a twig snapping or leaves rustling, but I couldn't tell if it was an animal or something else. I told myself I'd wait until daylight, then I'd get the hell out. As soon as the sun started to rise and the sky turned pale blue, I unzipped the tent fully and stepped outside. The forest looked completely different in the morning, peaceful like nothing had ever happened. But the rocks were still there, still forming a circle around the tent. I walked around slowly, checking the ground. That's when I saw them. Footprints, human footprints, barefoot. I followed them to the edge of the clearing. They weren't mine. I had been wearing boots the whole time. These were narrow, long prints. No tread, just bare feet pressing down into soft dirt and pine needles. They walked straight out of the clearing and into the woods, deeper in. I didn't follow. I didn't care where they led. I didn't eat. I didn't pack up. I grabbed my phone, my hatchet, and started walking back the way I came, as fast as I could. I didn't run. I was too afraid of getting lost or tripping, but I didn't stop for anything. Every 20 steps or so, I'd turn and look behind me, half expecting to see someone watching from between the trees. But I never did. I made it back to the trail after what felt like an hour, and then to my car. I slammed the door shut and sat in silence for several minutes, locked inside. My hands were shaking. Eventually I drove away, heart pounding the whole time, checking my rearview mirror like someone was going to step out of the woods and follow me down the road. I never went back to get the rest of my stuff. The tent, the bag, the notebook, everything. I thought about reporting it to the rangers, but what would I even say? Someone moved some rocks and walked around barefoot near my tent? No threats, no harm, no words spoken. Just the quiet and those prints leading away. I knew they wouldn't care. I barely understood it myself. To this day, I don't know who it was. I don't know if they were watching me that evening, or if they followed me out into the woods. I don't know why they didn't try to hurt me, or why they moved the rocks like that. But something about how quiet it all was, how deliberate. It's the kind of thing that stays with you. That kind of silence doesn't feel natural. I've gone camping again since then, but never alone, and never off trail.